The Pokemon World Championships is just over a month away, and I have a problem. Gardevoir is the best deck in the format by a landslide, and I want to play a deck that beats Gardevoir. So I'm going to share to you a Gholdengo list today that I believe beats Gardevoir and takes a fantastic matchup spread going into the Pokemon World Championships. This new Gholdengo deck functions very similarly to the old Gholdengo deck with one key distinction. Now, with the new Genesect EX from the Black Bolt and White Flare expansion, Nestball now turns into a Genesect EX, which allows us to grab two Gholdengo EX. This is fantastic as we're no longer as reliant on technical machine evolution and now have a lot more access to Gholdengos, especially if we're not able to find the energy to use evolution, or if we simply go first and cannot use TM Evo on the first turn. The new air balloon inclusion also gives Gholdengo some much needed mobility. Gholdengo having a 2 retreat cost was very annoying when Gardevoir players would use Mind Bend to confuse Gholdengo, or when Dragapult players would counter catcher up a bench Gholdengo and hit it for 200 damage, forcing us to attach to that Gholdengo instead of attaching to Munkidori to throw off their Phantom Dive numbers. Additionally, the new release of Air Balloon allows us to play the Revavroom. The Revavroom is a fantastic addition, being a metal type so Genesect can search it out, and having an ability that naturally synergizes with the deck, as well as the Lavencia inclusion. The Lavencia inclusion is also included for things like Jellicent and Frillish from this new expansion to have some options under item lock, but synergizes very well with Revavroom, as you can grab energies from the discard pile to use Revavroom's Rumbling Engine ability to draw up to 6 cards. All of these inclusions from this new build make this deck a lot more powerful and very smooth. Part of the benefit of playing this very straightforward Gholdengo list is that it opens up our ability to play lots of supporter cards. What you'll notice from this list is that we're playing 4 copies of Boss's Orders and 2 copies of Professor Turo's Scenario. In this current format, it's not enough to simply hit hard and hit the active. So this is where those supporter cards come up, allowing us to manipulate the board in our favor. For example, with the 4 copies of Boss's Orders, we can target down Grimmsnarl's Frostlass, or Gardevoir's Munkidori, or Gardevoir's Gardevoir EX, to take key knockouts, which also reduce the threats on our opponent's side of the board and allow our Gholdengos to stay healthy. Similarly, with Professor Turo's Scenario, if we do eat a hit but they don't one-shot us and are preparing to knock us out on the following turn, say with a Munkidori's Adrenabrain, we can use Professor Turo to negate all of that damage and to play around cards like TM Devo in Gardevoir or in Grimmsnarl. Most of our items remain relatively consistent to the previous iterations of Gholdengo, with the exception of the 4 copies of Nestball. Nestball is a fantastic inclusion in this deck now with the Genesect EX, but one of Gholdengo's main issues going into pretty much any format was simply getting Gimmighouls on the board. Now playing 4 copies of Nestball, the deck has an overall consistency bump, which is very much needed, as the turn 1 consistency of this deck is the one issue that most players had with Gholdengo. For the tools, we have the 2 copies of Air Balloon and the 1 copy of Technical Machine Evolution. Now, like I mentioned, Air Balloon is a fantastic mobility card, but Air Balloon can also be used as an effective draw 1. Using coin bonus with the active Gholdengo to draw 2, and then using Air Balloon to retreat into a separate Gholdengo and draw 2 with that coin bonus will allow you to draw extra cards over the course of the game, so playing the 2 copies is there not only for the mobility on Gholdengo and Revavroom, but simply because it oftentimes will provide you that extra draw support. Technical Machine Evolution was normally a 2 of, but has now been dropped to a 1 of. It is still a very important card, as dropping Genesect is not optimal, and you would normally rather make the 2 Gholdengos without the hassle of the 220 HP liability, but we only need the 1 copy as we now have 2 reliable ways to put Gholdengo in play. For the stadiums, we have the 2 copies of Lavencia and the 1 copy of Jamming Tower. Lavencia has natural synergy with the Revavroom inclusion and is also very helpful for the item lock shenanigans, being able to grab some energies to get much needed KOs on things like Badoo or Frillish. The 1 copy of Jamming Tower is a hard counter for the Gardevoir matchup. Now, not all Gardevoirs are going to play Drifloon, but Screamtail with a Bravery Charm is almost equally as threatening, as they can reach to 240 and can use Adrenabrain to find knockouts. So playing that copy of Jamming Tower does prevent this and allows us to take an easy prize card if the opponent decides to do this. Alternatively, if we didn't want to shut off our own air balloon using Jamming Tower, we could play Tool Scrapper, although Tool Scrapper only has that one-time use, and Jamming Tower does get some residual value from shutting off Bravery Charms for the entire game until the stadium is bumped, and it also drops the Artisan, which can make it a little bit more difficult for decks like Gardevoir to find what they're looking for, and Jamming Tower can also shut off TM Devolution plays from Grimmsnarl or Gardevoir. Lastly, with the energies, we are opting to play the 2 copies of Darkness Energy and the 2 copies of Lightning Energy. The 2 copies of Lightning Energy are there for the Levencia. If we only play 1 copy of Lightning Energy, we don't get full value of the Levencia. And in fact, I would even consider playing 3 copies of Lightning Energy to ensure that you do get full value as often as possible. The 2 copies of Darkness Energy are there for the Monkey Dory. Prizing Dark Energy in this current meta, where a lot of decks are playing for these 2-shot knockouts, is very, very detrimental, so playing the 2 copies will allow you to use Monkey Dory as often as possible, and sometimes can also enable your ability to use Monkey Dory, and then Turo Monkey Dory, and then use Monkey Dory again to set up some cool plays that could take knockouts on things like Screamtail. I just want to give a quick shout out to my sleeve sponsor, Endgame TCG. Endgame produces some of the highest quality sleeves on the Canadian market. If you are interested in checking them out, I will leave a link in the description. Using code JCTFord at checkout will get you 10% at checkout and will support me as a content creator. I personally use the Cabernet Reds from the Omega line, so if you're interested in picking up some sleeves for your Charizard deck, go check those out, and I'll leave that in the description. So let's talk about why Gholdengo inherently has a good time with Gardevoir. Well, first and foremost, Gholdengo has 260 HP, which is very awkward for Gardevoir EX. In fact, double Adrenabrain plus Miracle Force is just shy. Doing only 60 from the Adrenabrain plus 190 from the Miracle Force is 10 shy, and this is a big deal. We do play cards like Turo that can revert this damage, and also cards like Monkey Dory to send some of that damage back. So not being able to one-shot a Gholdengo without using a Bravery Charm is a pretty big deal. The same thing can be said about a card like Screamtail. Without a Bravery Charm, it caps at 160. So not being able to knock out Gholdengo unless you have Triple Monkey on the board means until pretty late in the game, you are unable to knock out Gholdengo. There are a few things that you do need to think about though in these cases. Lily's Clefairy is actually an excellent attacker in this matchup, where if you do bench to 4 Pokemon, you will be one-shot by the attack from Lily's Clefairy. Full Moon Rondo with a bench of 5 on Gardevoir's side is going to be doing 200. With double Adrenabrain, that's going to hit exactly 260 and knock out a Gholdengo. So you do want to be very careful about this, making sure to bench to 3 or taking out your opponent's monkey before they have a chance to get a second monkey in play, and this might prevent a KO there. Additionally, this is the wrong Genesect, but this Genesect will have 220 HP, so same thing can be said for Screamtail. Screamtail's going to do 160, and with the power of 2 Adrenabrains, that's going to equal exactly 220 to knock out the Genesect, so you do want to be very careful about when you choose to bench the Genesect, hopefully getting it turret up at some point, and definitely looking to underbench if you are going to use the Genesect. So you definitely prefer to use the TM Evo if possible, just to make sure you remove those liabilities from play. If Gardevoir decides to use a Bravery Charm in order to overload a Screamtail beyond the 90 HP, let's say for example they want to load 5 energies onto a Screamtail and then use double Adrenabrain to reach that 260 threshold, we do play that copy of Jamming Tower, which is very, very helpful. It will score you a knockout and then allow you to take a KO on whatever they promote. Just make sure that you do have enough energies in case they knock out, or if you knock out that Screamtail and then they promote that Gardevoir, you will need that full 7 energies to knock out the Gardevoir there, so just make sure you have access to that. The Jamming Tower inherently is only really for this use, but if Gardevoir players realize that you do not play it, it is very, very exploitable. Players will overload the Screamtail and it leaves you in a spot where you don't really have any good KO options. If you just knock out the Screamtail, well, they now have that open bench spot. If they have double monkey established already, they are going to be able to get that third monkey on the board, and that is a very, very big deal, since now triple Adrenabrain will be taking a knockout on a Gholdengo with Miracle Force. So you need to be very, very careful about that factor. One of the other matchups that are worth worrying about going into the World Championships is the Dragapult matchups. Well, there are a few of them, but the good news for us is that most of the Dragapult decks have cut that copy of Unfair Stamp, opting for the Neo Upper Energy in both Dusknoir Dragapult and in Straight Dragapult. One of the most annoying things about this matchup was taking a KO pretty early, getting Unfair Stamped, and then having to draw into a pretty big combo off the Unfair Stamp. To make matters worse, sometimes these decks also played the copy of Genesect from Shrouded Fable. This was a very, very annoying card, as the ability would prevent the use of Energy Search Pro as long as it had a tool. Now, most of the Dragapult lists have cut this now, which makes this matchup much more favorable. In fact, the copy of Munkidori and then now having access to Reveroom and then Air Balloon makes this matchup very, very favored. You have lots of mobility and lots of ways to throw off their math with the Monkey, and then having an inherent search for the Gholdengo makes this a very, very consistent engine. So if you open something like Buddy Poffin plus Nest Ball turn 1, well, you can simply just grab the Genesect before you get item locked from the Badoo. You have your 2, maybe 3 Gimmigholes, and then now in the following turn you can simply use that Genesect ability, get 2 Gholdengos in play, and you are off to the races. Additionally, you don't have to worry about running out of energies and being careful to play around Badoo, because you do have that Lavencia, which allows you to get some energies from the discard pile and continue using Make It Rain to score KOs. The Marnie's Grimmsnarl matchup is an interesting one, but definitely one that's very, very manageable, especially with our list. Playing the 4 copies of Boss and the 2 copies of Turo is very impactful in this matchup, as Grimmsnarl will look to use Frostlass very early and for a very long time, trying to stack damage on Gholdengos and also on their own Munkidoris. One of the main ways they can win this matchup is simply by going for a Devo play. So if we take out the Frostlass, they don't have the ability to build up damage. They're going to eventually have to make a Grimmsnarl, and Grimmsnarl just doesn't do enough damage to trade into Gholdengo very well. So it allows us to outtrade them as the game progresses. Additionally, we have the copy of Turo. We have the 2 copies of Turo. So if we have a Gholdengo that gets damaged, we can simply pick it up and remove all of that damage from play. We also have the copy of Munkidori, which is very vital in this matchup, allowing us to send some damage back and use one less energy to take a KO using the Make It Rain. So in this matchup, as they go for that Devo play, one of the most important things that you can do is to make sure that you stagger your Gholdengos. You don't want to be left with 0, but you also don't want to be left with a board that they can just knock out your only Gholdengo in the active with Shadow Bullet, because then you have to find another Gholdengo. So usually what I like to do in this one is to get 2 Gholdengos in play and stagger the rest of the Gimmighouls. That way, if my opponent goes for a Devo play, these are the only Pokemon that are taking damage between turns from Frostlass, so in order to get a Devo play, they need to stack 70 damage on the Gimmighouls via Adrenabrain. So if we're targeting the Frostlass on the bench, we're targeting the Munkidoris, we should have no problem with balancing this. We can also use our Adrenabrain to heal those Gimmighouls out of range, and then when the Devo does hit, if our active gets KO'd, we can simply promote into a new Gimmighoul and evolve and continue the train. Maybe using a Night Stretcher, get Gimmighoul back, and then you just make sure that your Gholdengos are in a healthy state for the majority of the game, and from there you can stream KOs fairly easily. Well, I hope that Gholdengo guide was helpful. If you enjoyed this kind of content, please let me know in the comments, and I'll be happy to make more deck profile videos like this one. And let me know, do you think that Gholdengo is a viable pick for Worlds? Or do you think it's overrated and the new inclusions are maybe not as good as I think they are? Let me know, and until next time, I look forward to talking to you guys then.